Hello. Hi. I'm glad that you're here and thank you for watching. Last time I told you a little bit about my background doing activism. Um, Basically, I've been doing it for most of my adult life. Um, I also was a professor. I'm now retired. Um, for 30 years, I taught international studies, gender studies. Um, I also have lived and worked in Africa, Asia, and Europe. As we go along, I'll talk probably about some of the things I learned from people and from the experiences I had in various parts of the world. Um, so today, I want to share a story from Cambodia and then talk about Gaza. And I wrote a poem for Gaza, which I will read. And I'm just sharing my thoughts about this and the connections that I have made, and which is basically related to my experience, but also to my sense of history. This story. In 1992, the United Nations peacekeeper force went into Cambodia after a ceasefire, which the Khmer Rouge did not honor, and discussions toward a peace, an agreement between the government and the Khmer Rouge. So at the time that I went, the Khmer Rouge had complete control of the countryside. UN peacekeepers stayed within the city, Phnom Penh, which is the capital, or Battambang, the second largest city. They did not go out of the city. They certainly did not want to come into contact with Khmer Rouge forces. They also got combat pay, which meant that they had a lot of extra money, and they were spending it in the evenings at night on drinking in newly opened bars and buying teenage sex slaves that were being trafficked into Cambodia from China and Vietnam. These UN troops were from Ghana. That was the center of the AIDS epidemic in Africa at the time. And there was probably not one condom in Cambodia, and certainly no place to buy any. And the UN didn't provide them. A survey, I think maybe 3 years later, by a local, or maybe, yeah, it was an international NGO that did it, found that over 50% of the sex workers in Cambodia were HIV positive. Well, the story. I left Phnom Penh in the afternoon and went outside of the city on a motorcycle taxi to see a stupa. And after I got there and spent some time, I still had 30 minutes to wait for the return of the motorcycle driver to pick me up and take me back into Phnom Penh. And there was a lush field nearby with grasses up to my knees. So I took a stroll through this field. And in the middle of the field, I looked down at my feet and found that I was standing on human remains that were coming out of the ground. Bone and bits of rag, what was left of the clothing that these victims of genocide had been wearing when they were murdered. I was horrified, shocked, into absolute stillness. I couldn't move. I knew that if I were to step in any direction, I would be stepping on the human remains outside of the ground, not even dirt on top of these bones and rags. And I just could not move. Then I remembered something that Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, and my teacher said once. He said, no matter how horrible a situation you might find yourself in, you can always find your peace. You might find it looking at the sky, a flower, and there were no flowers. The sky looked blank. Then I saw a cow grazing in an adjacent field. And I grew up until the age of 6 on my grandparents' small dairy farm. And so I grew up loving cows. So I looked at her and breathed. And soon she gave me the peace and the courage that I needed to walk off that mass grave through this field. Well, after I got home back to Los Angeles, every night I had the same dream. Hundreds and hundreds of people from that mass grave were coming in both directions and coming into my bed. I always said the same thing. Please stop coming. I don't have room for you. I don't have enough room for you. And they would always reply, we will make room. And then they would continue to come. I suppose you could do an analysis of that dream using Freudian analysis of dreams and Walter Benjamin's concept of a collective consciousness and the presence of history. But that dream came every night, and a few days later, I was hanging out one afternoon with a couple of my Cambodian friends, and I told them about the field being walking on the mass grave and the dreams. And they said they won't hurt you as long as you see them at night. If you see them in the daytime, you are in grave danger. Well, I think 3 days later, I got a message from a journal in Japan. And they said, we heard that you recently returned from Cambodia. Would you please write us an article? I said, sure. So I sat down thinking about what I learned in Cambodia. And some of it was political, military. It also included the presence and the voice of people I talked to and people who told me their stories. And the US media wasn't talking about the genocide, but they were saying that there was peace in Cambodia, which wasn't really true. So my article was titled Cambodia, No Peace to Keep. And I just did my best to tell what truth I had gleaned, both from experience and talking to people in Cambodia and being observant and talking to activists doing work related to Cambodia, and just told the truth as close to what I could get from my particular analysis and what knowledge I had gleaned from many sources. Well, I faxed the article away to Japan, and that night the dream was gone. Apparently, the spirit of those dead from the genocide in Cambodia had achieved their purpose. And that purpose, I realized, was to teach me that speaking the truth was necessary. And that the dead have a claim on us, a moral claim. The 2 million people who died in Cambodia who were murdered during the genocide, they were either killed directly or starved to death, was the result of the Khmer Rouge that came to power as a result, if you look carefully, of the US bombing the smithereens out of half of Cambodia during the United States war in Southeast Asia. So, it's part of our collective history. And that reminded me of 2 quotes from the theorist, critical theorist, social theorist, Walter Benjamin, whose work I have always loved. Well, ever since I first read him many decades ago. Particularly from his book Illuminations, and the last section of the book are basically his theses on history. Everyone reads like a prose poem, as much as of his prose did. So I'll read you these 2 quotes that came to mind. There is a secret agreement between past generations and the present one. Our coming was expected on earth. Like every generation that preceded us, we have been endowed with a weak power, messianic, a power to which the past has a claim. That claim cannot be settled cheaply. This other quote is, "Even the dead will not be safe from the enemy if he wins, and this enemy has not ceased to be victorious." Well, as a segue to a brief discussion of the genocide in Gaza, I will read the poem I wrote for Gaza, and which I think needs a new stanza because people are starving to death in Gaza and have been for some time. The name of the poem is Not Forgotten. It includes a quote by the Palestinian artist Taysir Barakat. The quote is, "Everything passes, not everything is forgotten." So, not forgotten. Love held, wounded, bled out for a century. Prison, stripped, beaten, raped, mourned, unfound. Exile, another death endured. Everything passes. Not everything is forgotten. Shadows rise, awake, arrive, keening, tormenting nightmares, bringing stories untold, enduring. Doors of plague, of fire, of bones, of corpses, of refuse, unburied, unseen, open, then close, again and again. Horses of forgetting, of wasting, of easy hope, of truth unfelt, unsaid, wander as if lost, bloated, terminal. Day stops, goes on, remembering, walking, tattered, toward dusk, toward darkness, lighting another and another shadow, whispering, now. Okay, Gaza. First, I want to say that the actual death toll in Gaza is several 100,000, according to doctors and teams, medical teams with experience there, including people who went on teams organized by the World Health Organization, and researchers who did interviews. Hundreds of thousands. The Gazan Health Ministry, which is the source of the numbers that the newspapers and most journalists in the international press use only counts people's bodies who were brought or to the hospitals, and some of them had adjacent morgues, were identified and put on the list. Well, if you drop a 2,000-pound bomb on a high, large apartment complex, there's not going to be enough of people's bodies left to take anywhere unless you find a random finger, maybe a hand would be a big find. And many, many tens of thousands are under the rubble. So now, there has been a siege, a complete siege, most of you probably know, on Gaza since March 2nd. No food, no medicine, no water, nothing can come in. I saw an interview recently of a trauma surgeon who was in Han Yunis in Gaza when Israel started the bombing again in violation of the ceasefire agreement brokered by the United States, in which they agreed to. And the health ministry's number is 400 killed in one night. But you know that it's probably 3 times that. And half of them were children. Since then, he's said, well, at least the assessment up until a few days ago was that between 150 and 200 people a day die of starvation. And most of them are children under 5, because when there is famine, when a population is starving, children under 5 die first. All of the newborns in Gaza die because their mothers do not have the nutrition, because they're suffering severe hunger, to allow them to be able to breastfeed their babies. Now, the United States government is not just complicit. Israel is the U.S. empire's outpost in West Asia. The U.S. could stop this massacre tomorrow. All they'd have to do is stop the arms shipments, stop the flow of money, and announce an arms embargo. It would be over. It's our collective genocide. Well, this surgeon said that the Israelis have completely destroyed the healthcare system. It's not functioning anymore. The bombs alone are killing, an average of about 100 children a day. So what can we do? For one thing, make sure that you speak the truth to your friends, your neighbors, your family, your colleagues, your workmates. If you have a public forum, do it there. And do whatever is possible for what a Palestinian poet said is necessary. Throw sand in the death machine. If you have a handful of sand, throw that. If you have a thumbnail of sand, dig the sand out from under your nail and throw that. Well, we need to think in terms of a longer time strategy, because we have a fascist government right now waffling a little bit about their plan to wage war on Iran. The Pentagon's not big on that idea because they know that we would lose. Iran has the most sophisticated missile protection system in the world, Russian made. And has missile silos all over the country, ready to launch, even if they are attacked with a nuclear weapon, and destroy the oil infrastructure of all of our West Asian allies, which will send the global economy down the sewer pipe. That's their deterrent. In 2003, Khomeini issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons. He said that it was not moral. It would be against their religious beliefs to create something that could result in the death of life on Earth. And the U.S. intelligence services joint report said that no, they are not developing nuclear weapons. But that's the pretext. Iran is the only force, the only place in West Asia now that can take on, who has the intent and capacity to, if necessary, take on Israel, is Iran. Israel is our proxy, and this has been a long time plan. First, you take out Hezbollah and Syria, and then Iran is more vulnerable. Then you go for the big one, Iran. In the meantime, the genocide goes on toward its horrific conclusion. So what can we do? Well, we need a militant, committed mass movement with accountable leadership and real strategy toward a socialist party with the militant mass movement and labor, especially labor at its core, toward a national strike. And if things get as bad as they could get, it might be necessary to establish a government in exile because we have a fascist government. And that can't be voted away. The reason it's possible included the history of the Democratic Party and its war on working people to placate its bosses, the corporate class. We have oligarchs now running the government in combination, merged together with the fascist government. And then we have the corporate, not the oligarchic, but the corporate class, glad to see people losing their civil liberties. That's in line with what they want. A lot of the things going on, like moves to privatize everything that is now publicly owned and funded, like schools, government programs, like, oh, I forgot the post office, that's coming. Education, I guess I said that. Medicare, Social Security. Things are going to get pretty bad. The corporate class was down for the same thing. They had nicer faces for masks, but I don't think they're crying in their pillow. The tariffs have people alarmed, and the chaotic nature of economic policy. But the rest of it, they're down with. And that's the only way we're going to stop it, is a strike. It has to be national. It has to include students. People in other contexts have done it. You know, I don't know why people called the Russian Revolution the Bolshevik Revolution, because the Russian people made that revolution and they used a mass strike. In Cuba, same thing, mass strike. Well, the revolution in Vietnam had first the French and then the American wars, and beat them both to win their revolution. They were colonized, basically, or there was an attempt by the French to re-colonize them after World War II, and then the occupation and war against them by the United States. And there are other examples. I can't think of them right now. But one thing that's of concern is what Colonel Larry Wilkerson said. He's retired, and he still has ex-colleagues and colleagues in the military and intelligence services and friendships, etc. And he said that basically the United States is now hated by 4 billion people in the world. That's half the population of the world. And about half of the population of the world are children. I fear that there will be blowback. Well, there always is, but one form could take a terrorist attack within the United States. That would mean that our government could declare a state of emergency, and what's left of our tattered civil liberties will just vanish like smoke in the high wind. So we're in big trouble. And on the one hand, throw as much sand as possible, but join an organization that is actively organizing. because mass movement toward a party based in labor, militant unions, leading to a national strike. That's what I think we have to do. It isn't easy, but given the complicity of the Democratic Party in too many policies that have set it up, so yeah, all Trump has to do is flick a switch, and we have a police state. It's being developed. And next time I'll talk about that when I talk about the relationship between and the connections between the climate crisis and Gaza in an international perspective. And then in future, I'll talk maybe about the predicted war on Iran and what that would mean, and how Ukraine is connected to that. Okay, and I promised to read another one of my poems. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to read it. Okay, bye. And I will start posting something, either writing something or usually at least accompanied by a video every week. I think I have this figured out. Bye for now. Oh.